This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Hey, this is Brian Peña. I always join the Vito podcast, the best podcast in the United States.
And this is the latest edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. I am your host, Vito Geronimo Chirco, alongside a friend and guest of mine from MLive Sports, and that would be Tigers beat writer for MLive, Evan Woodbery. Evan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm glad that baseball is finally back.
It's finally back. The last time we talked, it wasn't here. It was delayed and halted for so darn long. And actually, you know, on a more serious tone, we had talked about Al Kainline's passing, Mr. Tiger, and the impact he had on the Tigers franchise and on Major League Baseball as a whole. So we talked all about that on the last time I had you on, Evan. But now we do have baseball back. They're going to get started here in late July for a 60-game regular season that was mandated by MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred. But I want to get to this now, Evan. So you as a beat writer, you've been at Comerica Park for Spring Training 2.0 per se. So the summer camp for the Tigers, different than ever before, and being played once again in Detroit too, which is just odd for a lot of people like yourself that are used to covering the team in spring training in Lakeland, Florida. So for you, what has the experience been like so far being at Comerica Park for Spring Training 2.0? It's
been really strange, and a lot. I guess you can say, well, it doesn't feel like spring training because it's not spring training. You know, it's spring training. You can walk around the backfields. There are 4 or 5 or 6 fields with action going on at all times. People are walking around freely. It's really laid back. Here, this first 5 or 6 days, it's almost been kind of like a really boring pregame batting practice because they've gone to great lengths to stagger the workouts. So we're even hearing from some players where, you know, you say, well, have you talked to so-and-so yet? He's like, I haven't talked to anyone except the 4 or 5 people that are in my workout stage, because basically they're trying to get them in and out. So you might have 4 or 5 guys that you're taking BP with, then you shower and you leave, and then the next group comes in. And so you're not really interacting with the team as a whole, which makes it kind of weird for the players. What we're going to see starting on Wednesdays is more inter-squad game, which I think is what the players have asked for, because the players have come to camp in great shape. What they need right now is real live games against real live pitchers. And obviously it's inter-squad, so it's going to be Tigers versus Tigers. But they really don't need more BP right now. They don't need more drills right now. They need to see real pitchers in real game situations so they can get ready for what's going to be coming in really just a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah, they want to get into the game flow, right? And I know you can only do so much BP and taking ground balls and taking fly balls. I mean, the in-game experience is so different. So what do you expect to happen with the intra-squad scrimmages for the Tigers coming up here?
Well, they said the first priority, and Ron Gardenhire said this a lot, yes, there are a lot of young guys here. Yes, everybody wants to talk about, you know, Torkelson and Riley Greene and guys like that. But they only have a short amount of time to get ready for the regular season. And so the starters or the presumed starters are going to have the priority. They're going to be the guys that need to get the at-bats first. And so maybe kind of like spring training games where you have starters in until they're done for the day, and then maybe you have some young guys fill in for the later innings. And likewise, you're going to see starting pitchers. They need to get stretched out. They need to be ready to throw 4 or 5 or 6 innings by opening day. They need to be ready to be at 75, 80, 85 pitches by opening day. So they're going to get the first priority for innings. And then after that, you're going to see the relievers and the young pitchers get opportunities. So I think it's going to be practical more than anything else. It's going to be getting innings and at-bats for the guys that really need to get innings and at-bats in a pretty short amount of time in just a 2-week span.
And speaking of the young guys, I mean, who's impressed you the most so far? And I've heard about Torkelson going deep and being very impressive in BP. Casey Mize has thrown now. Matt Manning has thrown. Riley Greene has hit. Which one of these young guys has impressed you the most? And maybe there's more than one guy that has really stood out to you thus far of the Tigers' young guys.
You know, I really like Matt Manning, and I'm not sure what we're going to see of him this year. I mean, if this had been a normal year, I think you could make a pretty good bet that we would have seen both Matt Manning and Casey Mize at some point in the summer. I still think they would like for that to happen, but I no longer think it's an absolute guarantee just because no one's really sure what's going to happen this year in the 60-game season. But as much as Mize is a very polished pitcher. He looks like he could go in there and pitch today. I like Manning just because he's a big, tall guy, and when you're a big, tall pitcher, you have a lot of moving parts, and it's tough to keep everything going the direction it should be. But his mechanics are just so pretty, and you hear about pitchers that have a violent delivery or pitchers that look like they're really efforting out there on the mound. He's the exact opposite. He looks so effortless, and his delivery is so smooth. And I just think that's why the Tigers are so high on him. He looks like he's barely breaking a sweat out there as he's pumping 95. So I've been impressed with him, and I think between Mize and Manning and also with Terry Skubal looking so good as well in the first spring training, I think the future is bright for the starting rotation.
And how many of these young guys do you think we'll see in the regular season here in 2020? Which you kind of already started talking about a little bit with Mize and Manning and whether or not we'll see those guys. But of those guys and then the hitters on the farm, what guys do you think we'll end up seeing in 2020?
Starting with the hitters, I would say it's very, very unlikely that we'll see Torkelson. That's not impossible, but I would say it's very unlikely just because they went out and got C.J. Cron specifically for this to be the first baseman. They've got ample options right now at third base, including some guys that they need to see where they stand in the organization. And frankly, Torkelson has not played a professional game yet, and it would be highly unorthodox to see him immediately. Not impossible, but very unlikely. Isaac Paredes, the third baseman prospect, I think if this had been a normal year, you would have seen him as a potential September call-up. So I think you have to consider him this year as a possibility, especially if you could make a case either way. Either if the Tigers are in it and they need a bat down the stretch, bring up a guy who has hit at every minor league level in Paredes, or if it's the situation where it's late in the year, Jamer Candelario has not done well, Dawel Lugo has not done well, and you want to see if Paredes is ready for prime time and maybe he can be your starting third baseman in 2021, then I think you could make a case for bringing him up too. So I would put him definitely on the maybe list. As far as the pitchers, I think it just totally depends on what happens. You've got two veterans who are in the last year of their deal, and Ivan Nova and Jordan Zimmerman. And so I think if you get to a point in the season where they're struggling, it's very easy to move them to the bullpen and say, okay, let's take a look at some younger guys. But if everybody's pitching well, the Tigers do have plenty of options right now in the starting rotation. They had 5 guys before you even figured in Michael Fulmer, who should be back or very close to being back for opening day. And then you've got Tyler Alexander, who I think will probably start out as a swingman in the bullpen, but he showed last year that he was a viable starting candidate as well. So you've got basically 7 guys before you even start talking about the younger pitchers. So I think their opportunities are going to just depend on what happens in the big leagues this year. If everybody pitches well, maybe you don't need them and you don't need to worry about it. If you've got guys struggling, I think you have to take a look at it. For Mize, really for both Mize and Manning, I think in a perfect scenario, you let them get their feet wet in 2020 and then have them going into spring training 2021 saying, okay, there's a job for you to go out and take it if you do well. Whether that will happen in a 60-game season versus 162, we'll have to wait and see.
And Evan Woodbery of MLive.com here with me on this week's edition of Tigers Talk. And, great to have you on once again. And it's been a long time, and glad to be talking some baseball here and about Michael Fulmer. Glad to be talking about him. And speaking of Fulmer, what have you heard about him being ready for the start of the season?
Yeah, I mean, he looks just in phenomenal shape. Lost a ton of weight. He'd already lost a ton of weight, and he lost more during the quarantine. So he looks really good. We don't see radar gun readings, and we asked him about it, and he says he doesn't want to look at radar gun readings right now, but he's pretty confident by the end of spring he'll be back to where he used to be, or maybe even a little bit better than where he used to be, which is not unheard of after Tommy John. Sometimes you do see guys, well, you almost always nowadays see guys that are able to recover their velocity, and sometimes you actually see guys that are even able to add a speck of velocity with a stronger elbow. So it's not unheard of. But, I think it's just a matter of where they're going to find a place for him out of the gate. Ron Gardenhire has been very cautious. He says he wants to see him in real games or real intra-squad games at this point. And I totally understand that. But, it's interesting. This is going to be a year where you're going to have a lot of guys out of the gate pitching 4 or 5 innings. So you don't necessarily need a 6th starter. You need guys in the bullpen that can give you 2 or 3 or 4 innings of relief at a time. And that's why I think probably the most logical first step for Fulmer will be pitching out of the bullpen. And then gradually, if need arises or if his performance dictates it, then get him into the rotation. Obviously injuries could change that. Other factors could change it. But I think, a logical place would be starting out of the bullpen, pitching 2 or 3 innings at a time, not pushing the envelope too much, just letting him kind of ease back into action. Because this was not part of the plan. The plan was that he would go to Toledo, pitch for the Mud Hens for a couple of weeks, get some real rehab games under his belt, and that obviously is not going to be an option this year.
And how much has, the fact there are no minor leagues, going to be none of that this season, how much has that impacted these guys and whether or not they will get reps at the major league level this year?
I mean, it's a huge impact, for some guys more than others. I just wrote about the catchers this morning, and you take a guy like Jake Rogers. Jake Rogers really, really needed a full year in AAA, not only for his own personal development, but just for his career, just for him to be able to say, hey, I'm put in a good year at AAA. I overcame the struggles of last year, and I'm ready to go be your starting catcher in 2021. And he's not going to have an opportunity to do that. I think that's going to leave a lot of unanswered questions at that spot and many others, where the Tigers were really looking at this year as a pivotal year developmentally for a lot of guys, and they're not going to have a chance to show that. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens for guys like Rogers and many others. I think you're going to have a ton of Americans that normally would not go to the Dominican leagues or to Puerto Rico, are going to try to get in the winter leagues just to get some reps that they missed this year. For pitchers, it's a double-edged sword because, obviously you're not going to obsess over the innings limits this year. You're not going to obsess over the pitch counts and things like that you normally would for prospects. But it's a year in which they're not going to be in live games, and I think it's tough to quantify that. It's a missed opportunity developmentally and for a lot of guys career-wise as well.
And Evan, as you know, and you know it way too well, same here as host of Tigers Talk, but a big weakness of the Tigers in the past, and last year specifically, was the lack of power and the frequent and just the high strikeout rate for the club as a whole. What do you think about that going into 2020 now? Do you think that will be something that is able to be rectified this upcoming season?
Yeah, they're certainly hopeful. I mean, it's kind of amazing when you think back to last year. We were talking about Torkelson. He was switching on and off in the batting cage with Brandon Dixon, and someone made a joke like pressure to put on Torkelson to go against the reigning 2019 Tigers home run king. And I had actually forgotten that Brandon Dixon actually did lead the Tigers in home runs last year, which is kind of amazing. In second place was Ronnie Rodriguez, who's not even in the organization anymore. So I mean, that kind of tells you how bad things were from a power standpoint last year. And they went out and got C.J. Cron, who hit a ton of home runs in a much more home run-friendly park in Minnesota. But he's a consistent power guy. He's been consistently good for 20, 25, sometimes 30 home runs a year. Jonathan Scope, likewise, hit for some power in a more hitter-friendly park. But he's the guy that they're hoping to get more production from out of second base than they did last year. So I think there are opportunities, and frankly, we'll see about Miggy. I mean, Miggy's power, it's no secret. It has really waned over the last couple of seasons, partly due to injuries and partly just due to the natural aging process. But if he could, just bump that up just a notch, I think it would be so huge. And I know it sounds like a broken record because I feel like we say this every spring about Miggy, but he really does look in great shape, and especially if you compare him to last year, where let's face it, he was overweight last year. He was significantly overweight. I mean, you could find him on the field by just looking for the fat guy on the field. He was playing well over what he had played at any point in his career, and now you can't do that. Now you almost don't recognize him when you're looking for him on the field because he has cut down quite a bit of weight. So whether that will translate anything power-wise remains to be seen, but at the very least, hopefully that will take some pressure off his knee, take some pressure off his back, and in doing so, maybe allow him to drive the ball to more fields, like he was able to do in his heyday.
And he's having fun out there, Evan. I mean, he's dancing all over the place on the ball diamond there at Comerica Park. He looks loose and more loose than a season ago and in recent memory with the Tigers. So I expect something positive out of him, actually, in 2020 in the 60 games. And what is your outlook for him now? Statistically speaking, and if I gave you an over-under, and I'm going to do it right now, Big Vito's over-under of 15.5 home runs out of Miggy in 2020. Will you take the over or the under on that?
That sounds kind of high for a 60-game schedule. I would probably go under. But, who knows? I mean, it'll be interesting. I think a 60-game season works to his advantage and really could work to a lot of veteran guys' advantage because, 162 games is tough on the body. You wear down over the course of a year. And this is basically a 2-month sprint. I think he'll be, in fresher, better shape than at certain points last year where, it's tough on young guys, but just being around the team on a daily basis, when you would see guys like Miggy, guys like Victor Martinez on a day game after a night game, when the young players were dragging, and if you're, 37, 38 years old, you're really dragging. I mean, it's physically and mentally draining to do that over the course of a 162-game season. So I think Miggy is going to be helped by the fact that this is just going to last 60 games. It's going to be a sprint. You're not going to wear down like you would wear down during a normal year. And, I think, and it's certainly the Tigers' hope, that they'll see some production because of that.
So the hitting was a weakness, glaring weakness last year, especially with the power. We already talked about that, Evan. Also the bullpen, and it has been for a long, long time with the Tigers. What do you think about the bullpen now, and how will it shape up, you think, going into 2020 here?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So on paper, at least, they haven't made a ton of upgrades, and they haven't done anything. Which, spending money on the bullpen is kind of a luxury for contending teams. It's rarely something that rebuilding teams do, just because the idea is you can kind of just throw anybody you pick up off the waiver wire or anybody in the bullpen if you're a rebuilding team, and that's more or less what the Tigers have done. I mean, if you look at the way it stands now, you have Joe Jimenez and Buck Farmer, and then I don't want to say question marks, but it's kind of fluid after that. I mean, I think Jose Cisnero and Greg Soto are going to make the team. I think David McKay is going to make the team. But, realistically, those are guys that might bounce between Toledo and Detroit in any given year. They're not mainstays. The only two mainstays in the bullpen right now are Joe Jimenez and Buck Farmer. And I like Joe before. I like him this year. I think there may come a point where the Tigers have to listen to the trade opportunities, especially if it's a deal, like Shane Green last year, where he just had a really phenomenal first half of the season. They felt like, well, his trade value is not going to get any higher than it is now. I could see a similar thing for Joe Jimenez, just because a closer is kind of a luxury for a rebuilding team. But if things go differently in a 60-game season, and somehow the Tigers find themselves contending going into the month of September, a closer is a pretty valuable asset in a 60-game season, just because you look at it, every game counts 3 times. So those high leverage situations in the 8th and 9th inning are even higher leverage than usual. So I think as much as there are questions in the bullpen, I think Joe Jimenez is a good guy to have, whether whether he's actually pitching or whether you're shopping him around.
So, Evan, who is that one pitcher you could see surprising, and then also that one hitter you could see surprising this year?
Well, I mean, I'll start with Tyler Alexander just because I liked him so much last year. He was phenomenal in spring training, and it kind of reminds me of Spencer Turnbull a little bit from a year ago, where he was a guy who wasn't necessarily in the plans. He just pitched his way into the plans, and that's what Tyler Alexander has done. And I don't even know if he's going to end up in the rotation this year or just as a swingman. But like I said, I think a swingman is going to be really valuable in the first few weeks of the year. So he's a guy that is not on the prospect radar screen necessarily, and is not going to be mentioned in the same names, as the same sentences as the Mannings and the Mizes. But if I'm going to pick a kind of a wild card candidate, I'll go with him just because I've always liked him. And on the batting side, I don't know if I would say that this is a guy that I would pick to click, so to speak, but I've always liked Jeimer Candelario. I think he's a guy that you can dream on just because he's got such a beautiful swing. He's an athlete. He's a gamer. He's a guy that works really hard, and he's just never put it together. And this is kind of do or die for him. He really needs to put it together, or just the Tigers are going to move on after this year because he's been given ample opportunity. So I had before the pandemic, I had this as very much a make or break year for him. And it still is. It's just going to be a shorter amount of time to prove it. And, I know the Tigers are really hopeful that he puts it all together. And because if he does, if he adds some pop, maybe you're looking at him as a first base option next year, not just as a third base option. But if he doesn't put it all together, the Tigers are very much possibly going to move on, looking at Paredes at third base, possibly free agent option for first base. So I think this is a big time for him, and I'm really curious to see what he can do.
Evan, I'll leave you with this. Over or under 21.5 wins out of the Tigers in 2020?
I will go over. And I have no maybe it's just the enthusiasm of preseason when everybody thinks they can contend. But the Tigers are going to be better this year. I would virtually guarantee it. They cannot be much worse. They've upgraded all their positions that were awful last year, and those positions, catcher, first base, second base, should be at least average this year, which is to go from worst to average is quite a jump. So I think the Tigers will be better, and I would go over 21 wins easily.
Evan, with that being said, man, stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy covering the Tigers this season, and hey, best of luck traveling as well when you do for M Live this year, covering the Tigers.
All right, sounds good. I appreciate it.